The next menu is the administration, and we're going to go under System, starting off with the deployment, and click under one and only node here in this deployment. And due to the additional features that are now supported in ISE version 2.0, you can see that there are now additional services that you can enable on a policy service node, things like SXP, and that's part of the TrustSec feature, where ISE can now act as either SXP listener or speaker, if you're familiar with the whole SXP concept. The next is the device admin service, and that's related to the TACX, so you need to enable that service for TACX function to work correctly. And then there's the PX grid that was already available in ISE 1.3 version. So what's new here are the SXP and device admin service. Profiling configuration in terms of the types of probes, nothing has really changed there, so you still have the exact same of options here. The next menu is the PAN failover, and that's something that was introduced back in ISE version 1.4. Prior to 1.4, if your PAN fail or the primary admin node, then what you have to do if you want to make configuration changes is to manually promote your secondary admin node. Right, so what you can do now in SF 1.4 is that allow the system to perform that function or that action automatically, to allow the primary admin persona to automatically fail over to the secondary. But the key requirement is the whole deployment requires 3 nodes or more for this features to work. Right, so you can have your primary admin monitoring and secondary admin monitoring, and the third node being the policy service node. So that policy service node can basically monitor the primary and secondary and detect when one of those fail and initiate the failover process accordingly. So if you have only a 2-node deployment type, this feature would not work. Referencing back to a Cisco recommended deployment guide, that would be equivalent to a medium-sized deployment or larger. All right, next menu option is licensing. And this page looks slightly different now with the added licensing requirement of the device admin to support TACX feature. And this is a one-time enablement for the entire system with the unlimited device number of devices support, unlike the Cisco ACS where you exceed, I believe, 500 network devices require a large license. There's no such thing here on ISE, so it would just require one single license one time to enable that feature. And as I mentioned, we're running eval license here, but you can see for the network admin, the quantity is uncounted. All right, next we move on to the certificate menus. What's new here is our version 1.4, you are able to create a multi-use certificate. So let's trying to go under the certificate signing request and pretend that we want to create a CSR. So prior to 1.4, you actually have to assign the function of the certificates to the CSR, but now you can basically just pick multi-use if you plan to use the same certificate for multiple of these functions, things like admin, EAP, which you usually do. Or if you're still not sure what the certificate is going to be used for, you can just use multi-use as the placeholder also. Right, and the new menu that has been added here is certificate periodic check settings. And this is to allow ISE to periodically perform a certificate expiration check on the radius ongoing session, just to make sure that if you have a long-lived type of radius sessions and somehow the certificate has become expired in the middle of that section, ISE knows how to deal with those scenarios where they're disconnected and blocked it according to your configuration. The next thing I want to point out here is under internal CA setting. So in addition to OCSP responder URL, we are now seeing a skept URL. It's kind of fall off the page here, so you kind of have to move it to the right. So here, the skept URL, what it's for is to allow the ASA firewall to access the VPN firewall to communicate with ISE and perform client certificate enrollment through skept for the VPN client. So in addition to how the internal CA used to be only available for the BYOD onboarding, now it's also become available for VPN clients to request for a certificate through skept via the ASA acting as the skept proxy. And the last thing that's new in terms of certificate related feature is the fact that now when ISE issue a client certificate, the certificate templates name are now added as part of the certificate attribute extension. So if you look inside a certificate that's been issued by ISE, you'll be able to picked out which template was being used to issue that certificate, and if you want to somehow reference that certificate template name as part of your authentication, you should be able to do so. Although we don't really have a certificate to show you right now, but when we do, I'll make sure to point out that certificate template as part of the extension. Right, then the next menu is locking. I don't think there's anything that's really changed there, as well as the maintenance. And the menu after that is upgrade, and this is a brand new menu that's been added on the GUI, and this is to allow the entire ISE deployment to be upgraded from the GUI as opposed to before, where you have to perform pretty much the upgrade through the command line. And also, if you have like a larger deployment with number of nodes, you need to know the exact order of operation. With the GUI-based upgrade, the system will kind of help you out with that also. And this is specifically for upgrading version 2.0 to later releases. So if you're running 1.x, then this feature obviously is not going to be available to you. So 2.0 and above only. All right, so it's actually going to take care of downloading the upgrade image to each of your ISE nodes and initiate the node upgrade. Right, then you have backup restore, which is the same, as well as the admin access. So let's go ahead and get under settings. What's also new here is the FIPS support. So you can easily enable or disable if your deployment required to have FIPS enabled. You can do it right here. Posture is the same. Then under the protocol, as I mentioned that now EEP-TLS is supported, we have additional menu option to adjust the protocol setting right here for EEP-TLS. And I believe the security settings menu is new as well, and that's to allow you to enforce whether it is TLS version or the SHA version. This is usually for backward compatibilities when you just do have the clients that use the lower security settings. But if you want to disable that moving forward, you can do it right here by unchecking those boxes. Then we have here is all the way down to telemetry settings. Now this is to allow Cisco to collect non-sensitive information about your deployment. And this is again new to Cisco ISE 2.0, and it is enabled by default. So if you do not want any information being gathered, again anonymously, then you can disable it right here by choosing no, I do not want to participate. All right, then move to the next menu, which is identity management. Click under identities, and under endpoints, the first thing you see here is a new graphical representation of your endpoint database in a form of pie charts. So you can immediately grasp how many devices for each device type. For example, we have here is Apple iPhone, Apple iPad, Cisco Switch, Apple device, VMware device, so on and so forth. And you can click into each of those segments of the chart, and what it will do is perform an auto filter for a list of endpoints down below. So here, when I click on Cisco devices, it immediately populates the column header that you usually type in manually for Cisco devices, and then only the endpoints belonging to that particular endpoint profile will be displayed here. All right, then the right hand side also tells you which policy service nodes are involved in those profiling. All right, then you have the endpoint groups and user group menus, and that's pretty much the same. Under the external identity sources, what's new here is the SAML ID provider section, which has been added, I believe, the start of ISE 1.4, and that's to allow you to integrate ISE with single sign-on server using SAML support or protocols, and I believe that first release is only support Oracle server, as is to allow the user to perform single sign-on on portals like My Devices and Sponsor Portal. So user doesn't have to re-log in when they're trying to go to those portals. Identity source sequences are pretty much the same, as well as the settings for users and endpoint purge. So we're going to skip ahead to network resources. Right under network devices, and as part of the third-party NAT support, when you add a network device now, you have to specify a vendor for that network device. So you can see by default, ISE comes with a number of popular vendors, things like Aruba Wireless Broadcast, Switch, HP, both Wireless, Motorola, and Ruckus Wireless. And by default, Cisco is selected for that. If you scroll further down on the device page, you have additional section for TACX. If the device supports TACX and you want to run TACX on that device, then you can add a share secret here. Not a whole lot you can do. And then you can also enable a single connection mode. All right, the network device group is the same, and there's a brand new section here for third-party NAT support is the network device profile, and this is where the third-party vendor-specific radius attributes are defined. Actually, it would have been defined under the dictionaries for the radius, and then you actually utilize it here. So you map those attributes to each of these profiles. So the system knows when it receives certain radius requests, it knows what type of authentication it will match for that particular vendor device. Since this is like a bigger topic, we're definitely going to have a separate video talking about how to create a third-party devices. Right, external radius server is the same, radius server sequences it's the same, as well as the NAC manager and external MDM. Part of the ISE 2.0 features is the mobile device management enhancement, which allows a device to be enrolled on MDM outside of ISE. So the devices actually have to go through the onboarding process and gets redirected to MDM for device registration. So you can be enrolled outside of that process and then allowed to connect to networks that's managed by ISE. Although I thought that it could have done that already in the previous release, but I guess officially on 2.0. Also, the Meraki System Manager MDM is now officially supported. Although we kind of saw back in our ISE 1.3 videos that we were able to get that working. And the last menu option here, which is brand new also, is the location services. And this is tied back to the location-based authorization that I mentioned earlier when we look under the authorization profile. And again, just to repeat myself, that's allow ISE to tap into the device location information that's being kept on the Cisco Mobility Services engine. So we'll be able to use that information and kind of track the device location, and you can utilize those location information as part of your authorization policy. All right, so you can allow or deny access based on the device location. Next menu option over is device portal management, and for the most part it's also the same here except for a brand new portal that got added, which is certificate provisioning. As I mentioned earlier, prior to version 2.0, the only way for a client device to be able to obtain client certificate from ISE internal CA is basically to go through the BYOD onboarding process. And now with 2.0, you can do the ASA skipped through the VPN, which I already talked about. And this is actually the third option now, which is through the certificate provisioning portal. And this will allow a device that cannot go through the onboarding to obtain certificate from ISE through the web enrollment. And this is very similar to what you guys might already used to when you go to like a Windows CA to obtain certificate through the web enrollment. We're also going to have a separate video talking about this feature. All right, next we have the PXGrid service, although we haven't had that service enabled, so we don't really see anything here. But as part of the PXGrid enhancement, you can now create and set up a new capability without having to update all of the other participants in the grid. All right, so I guess the whole process become a little bit more flexible and PXGrid subscriber friendly. Under the feed service, there is a test feed service button that you can do here. So that's just to validate if you have a full connectivity to the internet, you'll be able to reach back to Cisco feed service. And this was added actually back in ISE 1.4. Just wanted to point that out here. All right, so just click on that button. And then you have the identity mapping, which came out in ISE 1.3, so we're not going to talk about that. Now the last menu option here is WorkCenter. And that, as I mentioned earlier, is a brand new menu that's got added to the web interface. And currently there are only two workflows that are available. One's for TrustSec and the other one is for device admin. So the idea here is for you to configure these two features without having to switch to other menus. Basically, you just follow these steps right here or menus and you should be able to enable these two features. So for TrustSec, pretty much has the same functionalities as the previous version. but the Cisco is just trying, I guess, to make this configuration process easier and less confusing by creating this particular workflow. So under the WorkCenters overview, you can kind of review it. This is look very similar to what we had with the guest access. I guess this is when Cisco started creating this type of workflow. So if you go guest access and overview, you see something very similar. So you can actually read through this, get some idea, although doesn't really explain why you do certain things, but it still gives you a quick reminder, the order of execution when you configure those features. But what's actually new here under the TrustSec is this TrustSec Dashboard. So the dashboard allows you to monitor the TrustSec activity in your TrustSec deployment. Since we don't really have anything configured right now, there's not much to show, but we're going to be spending a lot of time in this video series looking at the Cisco TrustSec, so we'll definitely going to come back and revisit this page. All right, I'm going to skip ahead to one of the other new features on ISE 1.2, which is the SXP that I already talked about under the node services. Okay, for some reason I can't click ahead, so let me kind of refresh the page. Okay, so when you get under the SXP page, there's a pop-up window that tells you a little bit about the SXP and what it's for and what you have to do to enable it. So you must first enable SXP servers, which we saw under the node persona page, and then add the SXP device and configure the settings. All right, we're going to have a separate video on the SXP, so we're not going to go into that in detail. Okay, what's also new under the TrustSec is the automatic SGT creation. Before, you have to create or define SGT manually, but now the SGT can be automatically created along with the authorization policy, with the SGT name being the name of the rule as an option. I guess that is under right here, automatic security group creation. You can check that checkbox to have auto create security grouped, and then you have an option to define a name format for the SGT. You can insert the prefix or suffix strings to the name, or you can also have the name contain the rule name, SGT number, or both. All right, I'll come back and take a look at this under the TrustSec videos. And the last thing that's new for the TrustSec is the metrics. Now you have a capability to customize the SGT or SGACL metrics view. You can see that if you have a rather large definition of SGT, the metrics policy here can get rather big and easily fall off the page, but if you do not want to see all the SGT listed here, whether it's for the columns or the rows, then you can create your own custom view right here for the metrics. Like I mentioned, we haven't really spent a whole lot of time on TrustSec in the previous video series, so you're definitely going to get to see a good chunk of TrustSec videos in this video series. And now last but not least is the device administration section, and that is all dedicated for TACX configuration. We're not going to go through this right now since we're going to have a separate video series. Actually, it's the next video coming up on TrustSec configuration for device admin. So we'll go through this entire process. All right, I think we have pretty much gone through the entire web interface here. There's some other new features that we haven't really covered because it doesn't really directly tie to the web interface per se. So what we're going to do now is to bring up the ISE 2.0 release notes, and let's go through the list right here and make sure that we have kind of talk about each of these features. So I'm going to go through this section. We talked about device admin, third-party device support, TrustSec Dashboard, metrics enhancement, the Work Center section, automatic SGT creation, support for SXP, location-based authorization with integration with Cisco Mobility Services Engine. Okay, support for Boolean attributes. It's little bit obscure here, and that is referring to when you add a user attribute from Active Directory. In addition to the string attributes type that's always supported, now you can support Boolean type. All right, so if you don't do that, that would not be affecting you directly, so we can skip. And then we got EPTLS protocol support. There you go, KVM hypervisor support. So in addition to VMware ESXi, Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7.0 is now supported. Okay, then you got Cisco ISE telemetry. We talked about that. Certificate provisioning protocol, certificate template extension, where the certificate template gets added as part of the extension attribute on client certificate. Internal CA issue certificate ASA to ASA VPN user through SCEP, as I show you the SCEPT URL on the internal CA. GUI-based upgrade, we went through that also. Technical support tunnel for advanced troubleshooting. So this is to allow Cisco TAC to remote into your ISE server per se for troubleshooting. And it's just going to require a few CLI commands for you to open up that access to Cisco. So it's not that they can just access your box whenever they want, but you need to actually let them in. So that's just basically to help out when you call a TAC for support and they need to do a little bit of investigation on your box. Mobile device management enhancement, we talked about that also. Meraki MDM support, officially support MDM now. PX grid enhancement, guest enhancement with a change in guest type, profile enhancement. So let's just add a support for IPv6. Posture enhancement, disencryption, SHA-256 file check. I think we talked about all that too with the encryption, although not too much in detail, so you might want to read through this. Then client provisioning enhancement with the multiple Wi-Fi SSID on the NSP profiles, with the proxy configuration being available. FIPS mode support to show you the menu of where to enable that on the GUI. And then there's a whole IPv6 supports that got added. Alright, I think that's the end of the new feature. I believe there's one more thing that I would consider pretty important, which is the discontinue of support in the inline policy node. Let's see if I can search in here. There you go. Feature not supported in Cisco ISE release 2.0. So FYI, IPN, or also known as IPAP configuration, is no longer supported in ISE release 2.0. I guess we can validate that, because usually you'll be able to add or register an IPAP, and there you go. You can no longer do that in ISE 2.0. So if you have an inline node deployed currently with the 1.x version, you will definitely need to look for a way to migrate away from that before you upgrade to 2.0. Alright, so hopefully you've got the fuller pictures of what have been included or new in this version, ISE 2.0. And what's going to be coming up in the subsequent lab video is we're going to go through each of those features, or most of it anyway, more extensively with the lab, so you get to see each of those features we just went over in action. And that wraps up our video on ISE 2.0 new features and web interface update. You can visit our website to view an extensive list of our lab videos and sign up to get access to additional lab contents. Thank you for watching LabMinutes.com, and I'll see you guys in the next videos.